We'll start now, and we'll be streaming in about 5 seconds.
Great. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know we just have 30 minutes here. We want to thank everybody for jumping on. I know everybody's extremely busy. I'm Casey English. I'm the Director of Business Development for CWDL. I'd like to get started by welcoming Troy Garris, founder and managing member of Garris Horn LLP. Troy is a business owner's lawyer, priding himself on a results-oriented, pragmatic approach to addressing legal issues in the financial services world. Troy deals with federal and state compliance, enforcement defense, company formation, and mergers and acquisitions. In these areas, Troy represents independent mortgage bankers, community banks, lenders, servicers, title companies, secondary market investors, and equity funds. Troy is active in the mortgage banking industry, and in 2007, the Mortgage Bankers Association named him to the Future Leaders Program. We also have Mark Wilson, CPA. Mark is the founder of CWDL, a rapidly growing assurance and tax and consulting firm dedicated to servicing the mortgage industry. CWDL is passionate about helping entrepreneurs realize their goals through the development of key performance indicators, tax planning, and providing a clear understanding of accounting data to make informed business decisions. CWDL has a vast client services offering, including MBFRF reporting, sub-servicing oversight, and accounting software implementation and cleanup for AMB, LoanVision, and QuickBooks. Prior to starting CWDL, Mark founded and sold a privately held independent mortgage bank, served as a CFO for multiple financial service firms, and participated in raising capital as well as M&A transactions. Mark's background provides him with a unique client-side perspective that allows him to understand the needs of CWDL's clients. Welcome, Mark. We're extremely lucky to have both industry experts on with us today about LL litigation and how to mitigate risk. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. Use the Q&A function to ask any questions. We're going to do our best to get to them, but if we run out of time, we will address them individually after, and each of you will be sent a recording of the webinar. With that, let's get started.
Sounds good. Thank you, Casey, for that introduction. I'm super happy to have Troy on the call today. It really is a treat to have an expert on this particular topic, and I know when we picked it, it was great because we have lots of clients that have questions about loan officer compensation. We have had many clients get involved with litigation and some other issues. So thanks for doing this today, Troy, and collaborating with us on this particular topic.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Casey, also for the introduction. Very kind words. And we have some kind of thorny and common questions that we have on our list today. We're going to try to squeeze as much as we can into the 30 minutes, and we probably won't get to everything, but hopefully we'll get to some of the more pithy kind of conversations. And so, Mark, if I'm okay just kicking off on LO Comp, that actually is something that I spend a lot of time on and have for a long time. And, one of the key areas that I see, and I'm guessing that you see as well, is in the concept of what do you do with branch managers, some of whom are producing, some of whom are allegedly at least not producing, and how do you make sure that you're not falling into, a situation where you're treating somebody incorrectly? Because typically, in my experience, what I'm seeing is that people who are trying to be classified as non-producers, they want to get paid on a profits basis or some basis that's not acceptable under LO Comp rules. And I don't know if that's similar to what you're seeing as well, but maybe you can share a little bit of your insights.
No, I think that's right. I think we see that a lot. Typical branch model, you'll have the branch manager who may or may not originate and want to be paid on the profitability of that particular branch. And so there are particular issues that come up, and we get questions often from clients asking about what is compliant, what can we do, what should we be doing in these particular situations.
Yeah, and so I have a similar kind of experience, and I will say, and I think everybody knows this, but just to be clear, paying profits to a person who's covered by LO Comp is not allowed. It just isn't. And there are a lot of other things that are not allowed also. The basic rule is you can't pay based on terms of a loan, can't pay based on a proxy for terms of a loan. And so those, those profits are deemed by the CFPB to be terms or a bundle of terms of the loans. And so that's just not permitted. Well, one thing that people often do, as far as or think about doing at least, is that they'll say, well, I have this producer and we want to pay him profits, but we got to get him to a non-producer role in order to do that. So how about we just call him a non-producer? And that just doesn't work. You got to make sure that the person really isn't engaged in any of those loan originator activities in order to be paid on a non-producer basis. And it's kind of hard because it's so ingrained in a lot of the people that are branch managers. They're usually awesome at sales, and they usually have a long list of people that just call them from time to time because they're moving or they're refining or somebody got referred over by a friend. And so people call that branch manager. And once that branch manager starts talking to a consumer, that person very likely and very easily can slip into a producer kind of a role. And at that point, you wouldn't be able to be paying profits anymore, or any other way that's not LO comp permitted. But it's a big issue, I think. I also see in the same category a lot of people that will have like a couple. So there's the one spouse is a producer, paid on LO comp covered compliant basis. Another spouse is a non-producer and paid on often a profits basis or net profits basis. And that, it's an area that is largely unexplored. There is certainly room for the agencies to call that an impermissible kind of a compensation structure. I've talked with, even at the CFPB itself, I've talked with some people who say, yeah, that should be fine. And I've talked with other people who say, yeah, we can't have you doing that because direct or indirect compensation is covered rather. And so if I'm paying the one spouse on profits and then they share bank accounts and they file joint taxes and they own everything together and it's community property, it can be an indirect compensation structure. It's still largely unexplored, but as far as legally, but there's certainly some risk there and something people want to think about in terms of how they structure that. Something else that I see, Mark, and I don't know if you see this a lot too, but even today, I run into people probably once a month, maybe once every 2 months on average, where somebody is paying differently. These are to loan originator covered people now. This is not the non-producer. So you have a LO or a branch manager who's covered, and they're paying differently based on whether the loan is one type of a loan or a different type of a loan.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about lead source, right? So if it's a self-generated lead versus a company-provided lead, they might have a different comp structure for each one of those leads. What are you seeing from a compliant perspective? And I think that's real common, especially originators that have a consumer direct channel and a retail channel. So those are the two areas that we see that.
Yeah, so this entire area of the world is really just risk management and in that regard. So there are arguments that you can pay differently based on whether it's self-generated or company generated. There are risks there, including that a lot of times loan officers can figure out ways to switch channels. So if the loan officer wants to move a loan from one channel to the other for some reason, oftentimes it's concession driven, then they might do that. And so it is an area that probably you can structure something that is at a risk level that most risk appetites can tolerate. But that said, you really got to make sure that you think through it, you understand what the risks are, and you make sure that you have controls in place so that creative people, and I love LOs in part because they're so creative, but they can find ways to change, for example, a loan from one channel to another just because it's allowed, and maybe the company didn't really think through that part of it. And it's not necessarily even nefarious. It's just their understanding of how the system works.
That's
But
right.
it can get people
And
in trouble.
I think that brings up a good point. Concessions. Concessions are a big part of this particular topic. Oftentimes we'll go into a client on a consulting basis, and they have LO comp, and they have their target company margin that's built into their model, and they're not realizing it, and that's oftentimes because they have loan officers coming in frequently for concessions. So I think most people understand. Maybe you can expand on what the rules are as it relates to concessions, but
right.
If you're paying in a compliant way, obviously the concessions only hit the company. The loan officer generally isn't participating in those concessions. So maybe you can let us, talk through that a little bit, and what your thoughts are, and maybe some pitfalls that you've seen.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So the concessions, almost entirely. There are some very small slivers where concessions, I wouldn't really call them concession, but where some loan level charges might be able to charge back to a loan officer if you set up your agreements properly. But almost exclusively, if you have a concession, it means the company is eating whatever the cost of that is. It cannot be the loan officer. It cannot be the producing branch manager. It's just not allowed. There has been for a number of years now a push at the NBA to convince the CFPB to change that thinking so that some concessions would be allowed, but at least at the moment it's not allowable. And so that's one of the areas too where we see a lot of people just at the loan officer level, the branch manager level, trying to figure out ways to change a loan from one kind of a category to another so that they can take into account the concessions in a way that somehow gets the consumer maybe a better rate or a lower fee, but also somehow gets the loan officer a lower amount that person's being paid. And again, it's not permitted. And so it's the kind of thing that the company's compliance officers and operational people and management definitely want to make sure that they understand and do some good training too. The LO comp rule comes with some real teeth. And when you think about these types of violations, often people think of it as, well, it's just a minor thing, right? So on one loan, this guy was able to pay differently on whatever the category. We paid differently on a bond loan as compared to some other loan, and he only did 4 bond loans last year. Yeah. So they think of it as a minor problem, probably never going to surface. If it does surface, probably never get in trouble, and it's not necessarily that limited pool of loans that are at issue, because if you're paying differently on bond loans, as an example, you're also paying differently on all those other non-bond loans. And each one of those could be viewed as a violation. And the violations can rack up pretty substantially. There's been a few settlements, as most people know, in this area. And the settlements have been in the multiple millions of dollars in civil money penalties paid to the CFPB. And they went after the principals in those cases and management in those cases as well. So it's an area that you really want to be careful about, because if you get it wrong, you're kind of rubber stamping the violation each time you do it.
Yeah, and there's precedence for how it gets paid out, because we've seen it happen across the board. So be careful, right?
Yeah.
I think the other side of that equation is we're just talking about concessions. What about these overage accounts, or oftentimes there was a time they called them point banks, which universally we've learned are not okay. But this idea or concept that you either have a branch or a loan officer that's outperforming. I mean, they're hitting a bigger margin than expected.
Right.
What's interesting is in 2018, of course, we didn't see much of that. 2019 was much better, and I would say 2020 is going to be quite large, right? I mean, I anticipate there's going to be these retail branch models that might have some of that. And so maybe you can talk a little bit through the rules around what that looks like. Obviously from our audit side, we have some strong opinions on that, but
Sure.
I'd like to see what, from your side of the table, what's that look like?
So there are different names that people give to these types of concepts. So some people will call them overages, some people will call them overrides, some people will call them point banks, and all of those terms have multiple meanings depending on who you're talking to and at the time you're talking to them. Right. And there could be some regional variations as well, I've found. But the basic concept that I think of this is it's money that is either it has been earned by the loan officer or more commonly the branch manager, but has not yet been paid out. And so it raises a bunch of issues. One of the biggest issue in my mind is from FHA, because most of the people that we're talking about having this sort of volume is probably going to be FHA approved. FHA has rules against requiring anybody other than the company from paying, preventing anyone from besides the company from paying any sort of operating costs. And so if the branch manager has money that's owed to him or her, and the company is keeping that money and using it to pay for whatever it is, some sort of costs of the branch or anything else for that matter, FHA is going to take issue with it. And the question of FHA always brings in the question of False Claims Act, and that those problems can spiral out of control. You can lose your approval, you can get civil money penalties, but the False Claims Act really stands out there as a huge hammer that FHA, and when it gets involved, Department of Justice can come after people with. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars of jury awards against companies in that regard, and it can be a huge problem. And it can be one of those problems that it's not just against the company, it's against individuals that are involved. So that's one thing. Another aspect that's a problem is that if you have an employee, whoever it is, but it includes branch managers, and that person has actually earned income, most states' laws and unemployment law side, and also the federal employment law, require you to pay that money out at the next regularly scheduled pay date. So you have the employment law issue there too of not promptly and properly paying out compensation to people that that have earned income. And much of this can really be structured around so that you're operating in a compliant manner. And I've designed a lot of comp plans over the years where we can get to, it's not exactly that. It's not branch manager money sitting in an account waiting to pay for the branch expenses as they go into losses, but it's really just a structuring issue. And does that person earn comp? And if so, when? And what's it based on? And most of that can be, we can get to a pretty similar result, but not have the company at risk that way.
Yeah, so through writing the proper contracts, making sure that they are written in a way that are compliant goes right along with it, right? And then I think we will meet with clients often and say, well, it's not really necessarily deferred comp, but it's a promise to support that particular branch or loan officer from additional marketing efforts, for example, in other periods of time. Is that looked at as compensation, or have you seen any pitfalls with that relationship, those type of agreements?
Again, it's kind of depending on how it's structured. I mean, company can use its money for whatever expenses and marketing it wants to. We just have to make sure that it's company money and it's not branch manager or employee money. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that it's not, if the person is covered by LO comp rules, that it's not compensation that's tied to or based on terms or proxies of loans, which is in some of these settlements they talked about, for example, point banks in some of those larger LO comp settlements. They didn't really define what it is, and the CFPB has had some trouble over the years telling people exactly what they say. That point banks, they've never seen one that's legal, but they don't really tell you what it is, and so you don't really know what they have in their minds, and other people have different things in their minds sometimes. But the main issue is that they have to. You go back to the rule, which is you can't pay based on terms or proxies for terms of loans. That's at its heart.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. I want to remind people, make sure you ask questions as we get through this. We want to make sure if we don't get to your question, we'll come back and follow up with you, at least set up a call, maybe chat. And we spent some time on LO Comp in particular, and before we go on to a different area, I want to make sure we touch on this idea of 1099 versus W-2.
Sure.
I think 2007 is long gone. We've come through, quite a bit. But we still, in most of our clients, if not all of them, are paying through W-2.
Sure.
Most of them are FHA approved, and that's an absolute requirement.
Right.
And depending upon which state you're in, there's lots of different state rules.
Right.
There's been additional guidance that have come out from a tax compliance perspective that makes it really hard to justify keeping these people as 1099s. But
right.
Maybe you can talk through that a little bit and what you're seeing out there.
Sure.
And really, we can talk through what the risks are by keeping them on 1099. But I think
so 1099, it's just a tax form, right? So in fact, I love
payment. Yeah, payment. Yeah.
So I love talking with CPAs because you guys understand that a W-2 is just a form that you report to the IRS on, and 1099 is just a form you report to the IRS on.
Right. Employee versus independent contractor.
That's really the issue, right?
Yeah. Right.
And so if you're an employee, your employer is going to report on a W-2 basis to the IRS, and that's how you pay and withhold taxes and so on. And an independent contractor would be a 1099 version, right? And one of the big issues there, in addition to just the general risk of probably in our world, with the very rare exception, probably in our world, mortgage banking, any of the tests that a regulator would run in terms of defining whether a person is an employee, therefore W-2, or a contractor, therefore 1099, it's going to be an employee. They are sponsored by you on the NMLS. They have your name and your NMLS number on their websites, on their business cards, on everything that they do. It's your name, the lender's name. It's, you have controls over them. You do the training. I mean, they're employees. There's no question typically. Now, there's some little areas that are a little unique and raise some different questions. For example, in California, where they have DRE sales, Department of Real Estate sales license can get you the ability to do a loan. But even there, if you look at any of the regular employment tests, you're going to probably have an employee instead of a contractor. So that's the first step. But the second, I guess the flip side of that same question is, why the heck would anybody want a contractor? On its surface, you think, well, the contractors are good because I don't have to pay their payroll taxes, and so that's good. They're responsible for that. Arguably, I don't have responsibility for them if they do something wrong. They're an independent contractor, so it's not really me if they punch somebody in the nose. But also it means that under RESPA Section 8, you don't qualify for an exemption in making payments to them when they send you loans, which is one of the critical points about the employee versus contractor type of analysis in this area, because there's specific language in the RESPA regulations that says you can pay an employee for a referral, and when a person sends you a loan, that's a referral.
Yep. As
a general matter, right? And so if a contractor sends you a loan and you pay that contractor, are you paying because that person is a broker? It's just unclear. So it raises these questions.
PPO channel, it's different, right? But if it's an originator and the loan's closing in your name and it's put in there, I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot of people. What you get kickback from is everybody else. There's other people doing it, or and it makes it harder to recruit the loan officer. And we understand that. I mean, from a lender's side, oftentimes the owners of these independent bankers, their clients are the loan officers as they're recruiting into their company.
Right.
And if the guy down the street is paying that person as a 1099 or as an independent contractor, or even even paying their corporation, oftentimes we've seen that and tried to through that.
Sure.
it makes them maybe in a less competitive arena because that loan officer wants to write off their other expenses and do other things. And so, so there is still some of that we run into on occasion. So.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark and Troy, I feel like this is a good time. We have a question and it's real specific to what you guys are talking about right now. Thoughts on several major national lenders offering a pick a pay option where the loan officer can pick which pay scale or price sheet they want to work off of. So any thoughts on that?
Yes. Go ahead, Mark.
It says I may get paid more than an LO in an office next door, but the rate sheet is higher than what he or she is charging as well.
Right.
And it says all in the same MSA. So
right. So they tend to, the LO comp rules, even though arguably the LO comp rules don't allow that, the CFPB has read it to not prohibit that type of situation, but it raises real serious fair lending issues. Because just as Mark said, you got two different LOs sitting side by side, perhaps even. And if I call LO1, I'm going to get one rate. If I call LO2, I'm going to get a different rate. And if it turns out that happens often enough and there's some correlation to gender, race, ethnicity, age, whatever it is, then there's going to be a real fair lending issue. And that's an issue that, as you can imagine, in this world, especially, the CFPB has been focused on pretty heavily, and we can expect that will continue or increase even.
Got it.
Okay, and one more question. Any issues when paying out commission once the loan is bought off the line versus the time of funding or closing?
So I think what that means is they're delaying the time when they're going to pay compensation. So the question there is going to be, it seems like a nuance, but it's an important one. You have to define when that compensation is earned. And you're going to do that in the agreement. And you got to set up the compensation formula properly so that the person doesn't earn compensation until certain things happen. So the person originates or does all the work to originate the loan. Maybe the loan gets closed, maybe it gets funded. You can build in a variety of different criteria for when that person earns that compensation. But as soon as the compensation is earned, next payday, and you can calculate it, next payday you got to pay that person according to your agreement. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the way to do it. So it's possible to delay, but you got to make sure that that's what your contract actually says.
Yeah, and you want to be consistent on how you treat it, right?
Correct.
I'd say as far as what we experience from our clients across the country, I'd say most of those are, as soon as the loan funds, they qualify for the commission. And then, and the timing of it varies from either, 2 weeks post funding to very next pay period. That part's varies, but the vast majority of them is the funding that triggers the earning, not selling it off the line per se. Because we have a lot of, they'll move it off the line, but they end up servicing that loan. It'll never, so it's usually the funding is the trigger. But
right.
So I'd say as far as being consistent is the most important piece of that puzzle, and then followed by just following your particular internal policy.
Yeah, for sure. So Mark, we're running short on time already. Actually, yeah. I knew this. We would have a bunch of stuff in here. How about?
Go ahead. What were you going to bring up?
I was just going to say the movement of loan officers is another very frequent issue that comes up, and so people are aware out there. I think that there's been this problem, and it continues to be a problem. And I have a couple of cases right this minute where what's happening is, you have an LO who has a long list of clients, and people have been calling him or her for a long time. They refer people over. And so they come in with the virtual version these days of a Rolodex. And so they have all these contacts. And that's why a lender hires people, right? Is that they're star producers. That's what you want, right? But there's a real fuzziness when people start in people's minds about when they start thinking whose contact and whose information that is. So if I'm a loan officer and I walk into your shop and you hire me and I have 500 people's names and phone numbers with me, when I do that, there's, on the one hand, I'm thinking of it as these are my people, not yours, and I'm not giving them to you. And if I leave, I'm taking them. So there's a question there as to whose are they really? Because maybe I left some other company and brought that with me. And so does it belong to this other company, this prior employer, or does it belong to me? And I don't think there's a real clear answer there. And I know that people differ on what they believe that information is. And similarly, if I go to work for the new company and then I start building up additional contacts because that's what I do, and then I want to leave there, do I take the original 500? Do I take people? Do I take 0 people? Do I take the 500 plus whatever I built up there? Like, what is that? And so there's a lot of different regulations that come into play. For example, of course, the lenders have, as financial institutions, have privacy and data security provisions that apply to them. So they need to make sure that they're not letting people walk off with borrower information. Similarly, the LOs tend to believe that this information belongs to them, and that's how they make their livelihood. And they view it as they can't if they don't have that information, and they may not even come to work with you if they think that you're going to somehow try to prevent them from taking at least some of that type of information with them when they leave. So it really does create this kind of netherworld of activities where people are trying to figure out ways to get out the door with information, sometimes even loan data information, but not even if you're not even talking about that, even if you're just talking about the lists of people, it's all potentially covered by a federal Trade Secrets Act, various state Trade Secrets Acts, because every state has one, and then basic privacy laws under various states' provisions.
Yeah, I would add, obviously loan officer contracts and agreements are important in this particular circumstance.
Sure.
So if you have LOs working for you, first of all, make sure it's clear. Loan starts at your company. It's your loan regardless of whether or not the loan officer is with you. I think typically there's some trailing commissions that generally have to be paid out. We've had multiple clients have litigation on both sides of this situation, where a loan started with a particular lender, that LO left and took that borrower, like you said, to the new lender. And I will say, I don't know at least in our experience, we've come in to help calculate damages and other things on that side.
Right.
Almost always there's a payout, from old lender to new lender. Right. And so, just that's a pretty common thing that happens. So I would be careful on that, as we see.
And I think you also have the question of if you find out that somebody left with that data, do you have to notify the state AG? Sometimes you might. Do you have to notify the consumers? Sometimes you might. It's a real problem.
Yep, real problem. Kind of rapid fire. I want to respect everybody's time on the 30 minutes. And I know that was a fast 30 minutes. I don't know, it went quick. But real quick, let's go through.
Sure.
So we talked about moving loans. Maybe the big things in the news. Advertising, getting people in trouble. Maybe you can talk through that real quick. What you're seeing. We've seen some settlements in the media coming out for lending. Go ahead.
So a big area here is the CFPB. Even the current CFPB has been pushing this strategy of making sure that people reach out and market to all areas, all demographics, to everyone. And in part, it stems from the CFPB trying to overreach in terms of the requirements of ECOA and on the HUD side, the Fair Housing Act, but trying to impose kind of a Community Reinvestment Act, kind of an obligation on independent mortgage companies. So it's an area that you need to watch out for. Again, I think the CFPB continues to be focused on fair lending and probably will be so more so even going forward. But that's a big area. Also, just in terms of the various platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or whatever other types of media platforms people might use, loan officers in particular might use. You got to make sure that if they're marketing loans, that they have their NMLS numbers on there, and they have, whatever other licensing information they might need to state by state. So that's important. And rates and other information that are on advertisements. Typically, an advertisement in social media is just like an advertisement in print. There's some variations, but the rules, generally speaking, try to get to the same thing. And so you got to make sure that you have some kind of pre-approved process where what the loan officers are advertising or managers are advertising.
What about rates and things that are put on these like flyers and and postcards promising certain rates? And we see it's usually a consumer. Oftentimes we'll see in a consumer direct model. What are you seeing?
Yeah.
What's allowed? I mean, what can they say? What can they get in real trouble?
Yeah. Frequently, like people will use trigger terms, and so under various provisions, state and federal both, you have to include certain information. So, for example, if you put an interest rate, you have to include the APR, and you have to include a scenario that's based on. It has to be relatively fresh, depending on the type of medium that it's in. And it really, that really could be a topic for a whole training session. But really what the company should be doing is making sure that they have some pre-approved product that they've seen before, and you don't have to reapprove every time you have a different iteration where it's a different face or a different house printed on the advertisement, but the general content of the advertisement should be pre-approved, and then the loan officers have some flexibility in sending that information out.
Great. I see a couple of questions come in that are more along the line of hazing questions towards me. Yes, Jim. I also had a mustache like this in high school, and I'm growing it out for November as a firm thing, and it will be probably immediately shaved off on December 1st. Thank you for listening. Yes. Good.
Oh, come on, you can keep it.
Yeah. And the hair dye is just called silver and gray. That's just what happens. So just getting old. Thank you for noticing that as well. Sure. So and we have on here. So we have two topics that we've kind of touched on a little bit, but not too much. It's RESPA and licensing. Do we have any rapid fire topics we can get through from that perspective?
Yeah, so RESPA is, I'll say RESPA is a big issue right now. I get calls on it almost every day. And these are Section 8. So RESPA is broad, right? But RESPA Section 8 calls where somebody is trying to get money into the hands of somebody else in connection with referrals of some type. And there are a variety of different ways that people try to do that over the years. There's nothing really new in RESPA, but it's just a cyclical kind of ramp up and ramp down in terms of risk appetites. So there are a lot of things that people can do, and I guess the only novelty in this area is that some of the fintech companies believe that they've come up with some types of platforms that maybe don't exactly fit within RESPA, and they have questions there, but by and large it's the same as it always was. But you do got to be really careful, and with the new administration, which we presume is going to happen, we don't know for sure 100% yet, but we assume it's going to. And we do know that the people who are on the transition team focused on building out the CFPB, that's people that we've seen before, and we know some of them. And they're from the Cordray era, and so I would expect that, especially because of the racial justice kind of a notion that's going around in the country. There's a heightened appetite for going after some types of practices. And so I think we can really see ramp up in enforcement in a lot of different areas, but including RESPA. And so, marketing services agreements, people are asking about those a lot. Renting of offices from real estate agents, that's coming up a lot. Just the typical whining and dining, the social platforms like whether it's Zillow, Realtor.com, et cetera, Trulia, those types. All of those are areas where you really have to think through what you're doing, because there are a lot of people that think that those are some great avenues to develop business in, but there's a lot of risk there, and I expect that to be increasing over time here. So I'll step in on Ruspa for a second, see if you had anything more.
No, I think that's good. I think we've ran long and we've gone over 10 minutes. So why don't we'll have to do it again. I think maybe
Sounds
what
good.
we'll do is we'll do this again. And I really appreciate your time. For those of you on the call, if you want any additional information, I think there might have been a question or two that came in that we didn't get to. We'll circle back with you and email you a response or jump on a call with you. If you have any other questions, please send them over to us. We really appreciate you joining us. We're trying to really make sure that we're living up to our core value of being invested in our clients and giving them information that is valuable. And we know people are on Zoom calls all the time, and so we're trying to keep them short. So I appreciate that. And like I said, if you have questions, please reach out. Troy, you have anything?
Yeah, it's just the same thing. I do appreciate everybody's time, and CWDL and the whole group all your team is awesome, and we do appreciate it. It's great working with you on this, and if people have follow-up questions, happy to chat with you about it.
Yeah, we appreciate you being a resource for our clients and mutual clients. So
yeah, same here.
Great. So thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And we're looking forward to doing this again the next month or so. So
sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.